I just wanted to say thanks to the community for giving us some time today to talk about Atlas. And the focus of this talk and our breakout sessions is going to be what we want out of Atlas in the future release that we're planning shortly. So what we're going to do within the first part of this is just to kind of level set on what is Atlas, what are some of the technologies that are involved, and the working group that is supporting the development of Atlas. Chris is going to take us through what is coming up in the next release or what is being discussed and planned. And then we'll start the breakouts to get input from the community around what is to come. So, Jack, not sure if you're on the call. Hopefully you are. I think he wanted to take us through these slides. Going once, going twice. Do we have Jack on here?
I don't actually see him.
Yeah, I don't either. All right, well, I'll do my best Jack impersonation and kind of talk through this set of slides. So at a high level, we wanted to just talk about what is Atlas. So Atlas is the user interface that's been developed for designing and exploring patient-level data converted to the OMOP Common Data Model. And you can think of Atlas falling into a couple of different functions here. So there are functions within Atlas that are used to explore your data source. If you're familiar with the Achilles package, so you run the Achilles package and you could use the data source functionality within Atlas to go through characterizations of your data sets and high-level record counts. You could explore different domains from your data model. Next, you can build cohorts, which includes functionality for concept mapping to concept sets and cohort building. We also have characterization or descriptive statistics functionality. So once you've developed your cohorts and populations of interest, you'll want to characterize them, perhaps do some incidence rate analysis for those cohorts, as well as potentially treatment pathways characterization analyses. And finally, we have advanced analytics that are part of the platform. So we have designers for designing a population level estimation study as well as patient level prediction. Those designers allow you to download an R package for execution of those functions, as well as there's integrations with Arachne for doing those executions online. So a quick example of some Atlas components. So we could think of the building blocks within Atlas as the list of concepts, and the concepts correspond to a record of a clinical event in your OMOP common data model. Those concepts, you might take essential hypertension as an example of a concept that you would find in your data. You could take essential hypertension along with other hypertensive concepts. You could group those together to construct a concept set. These concept sets try to isolate and identify patients that have hypertension within our data. Those concept sets and temporal logic together combine to make up a cohort. And if you joined us for Phenotype February, we covered quite a bit around this and using Atlas to design those cohorts. And so we could take an example cohort of patients with a record of hypertension between a certain date range as a group of people we would want to study and characterize using Atlas. So our intent today is not to provide a deep dive into Atlas and the platform, but instead one of the things I wanted to point out to the community is there are resources available online if you want to do a deeper dive into how to use Atlas or even how to set up Atlas. One great resource is the Eden Academy, which we've linked here. There are two courses in particular that are applicable to Atlas. There's the Atlas course itself, and then there is an infrastructure course which talks through and how to install and configure Atlas and Web API and some of the other tools. In addition, if you don't have Atlas available within your organization, there is a publicly accessible instance of Atlas on atlas-demo.odyssey.org. You can make use of this if you'd like to kind of kick the tires on Atlas and get a feel for how the application works. So at a high level, Atlas is a bit different than, say, the Hades packages that you hear a lot about. Atlas is using a different set of technologies to power the front end website as well as to provide functionality for saving information. So The Atlas project itself is a web application developed with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. It's basically what provides you with the view that you see when you open up a web browser and go to Atlas. Then behind the scenes, the web API project is really what's providing the plumbing for Atlas. So if you wanted to use a house as an analogy, the Atlas front end is more like the walls that you would find in the house, and web API is the plumbing that's running all of your electrical and water and heating and that sort of thing. And so these two projects work hand in hand to make Atlas work. And so they require slightly different skill sets in that JavaScript and front end technologies are very different than Java and some of the back end server technologies. So in order to provide support to the community around developing on those technologies, we've established the Atlas Working Group, and our mission is really to support the community of folks that want to contribute code to Atlas, whether that be through the Java end or the JavaScript end or both. And so again, these tools are really aimed to provide capabilities to design standardized analytics to execute on the OMOP Common Data Model. So within our working group, we have the following schedule. So every month, every first Tuesday of the month at 9 o'clock, we have a monthly meeting that aims to highlight new features that are being built by the team and to provide updates on upcoming releases. They're meant to be at a high level for those that want to keep up with what's happening on the platform. We also have weekly meetings every Tuesday that are not the first Tuesday of the month, where we do much deeper dives into the technical components that are going into new features. We will review and triage issues. We will also have discussions around design. So this gets very much into the weeds of the technology. And so if you're not comfortable with those level of discussions, this may not be the right fit for you. And just for awareness, our next monthly meeting is going to fall on the 11th of July. So within the Atlas Working Group, we had defined the following objectives and key results for ourselves for this year. The first objective that we had was to release Atlas and Web API 2.13, which I'm happy to say was completed and delivered on time. And so now we are in the second objective, which is to establish and maintain a robust software development plan for Atlas moving forward. And the first bullet, which I've highlighted here, is to identify candidate features for future Atlas releases through active solicitation from the Odyssey community and Atlas users. And so this is an important step that we really hadn't done formally before. We wanted to get input from folks like yourselves that may be using Atlas in your organization or may not be able to use Atlas for certain reasons. And so we wanted to at least hear that feedback and start to use that as a mechanism to help us plan the next release. So once we have the backlog of issues that are potentially in scope for 2.14, which will be the next release of Atlas, we will review those and they'll be prioritized and selected by Patrick and Greg. Once we have a scope of features that we would like to work on, myself and Alexi are going to identify developers within the community to lead the design and implementation of those features. And then once those developers are identified, they'll work through the process of designing the specification for the feature. Chris Knoll is going to then review those designs and implementations. Once the implementation of those features are completed, we'll, of course, test and then work with the community to approve and release those particular features. So just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the recent development activities that have gone on into the latest release of Atlas, we have developed and deployed a mechanism for the cohort SQL rendering. So if you're familiar with Atlas and you know that you can go and look at a SQL view of a cohort definition, there's now capabilities within the editor to substitute in values that are specific to your CDM environment, where you might want to put in your CDM schema or your cohort identifier, that type of thing. So you don't have to bounce around between different tools to do that. You can now do all of that within Atlas. Another thing that was changed and kind of standardized within 2.13 is the generation interface. So if you want to generate a cohort on a data source, that interface looked a little bit different between different screens within Atlas. And so we've just standardized that to make it more uniform. The data source selection for concept count. So if you're familiar with searching the vocabulary in Atlas, you have the capability to look at record counts for a given data source. There was a default that was always selected, and now we've provided some more flexibility so you can dynamically pick that data source record count from the from the search screen. And finally, like we have a new concept set preview capability. So if you want to add a concept to a concept set or make a change to a concept set, you can view the impact of that change before you actually save the concept set or commit it to the concept set. And I just wanted to note in the fine print below, we have very detailed release notes for both Atlas and Web API on GitHub at these addresses, if you want to go deeper into this. And so with that, let me turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk a bit about what's coming up or what's been discussed for 2.14.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. So I'm just going to go through some of this work has been completed, some of it is in progress. This is for the 2.14 release. The plan for 2.14 is to hopefully hit a release of July. That would pretty much get us on time. This list may be modified to kind of like decide whether or not all these features can actually or are appropriate for a 2.14 release. The first item on the list here is something that is being worked on from Odysseus. This is the advanced concept set search via Solr. This function will let you search concept sets by sort of like natural language terms, similar functionality that we currently have today if you have Solr enabled for concept set searching. The idea is that when you save a concept set, the elements in the concept set can be serialized or digested into the synonyms and text terms of the concept, such that a Solr index can be created. So you can search for those terms and it'll return those concept sets that match those terms. So think of it as a advanced text-based concept set search functionality. Tom White has contributed a lot of work for better Spark support. So this is things that have actually been committed to master. So it will be in the next release of Atlas. Various reports were failing with the Spark dialect and some other issues that were surfaced from his analysis, and we really appreciate that work. So those pull requests have been reviewed and committed. Rich Boyce is working on a filter for assets with read permissions. So if you're in an environment where you really only want to see your own work, you don't want to see other people's work, there will be a flag or setting that you can enable in Web API such that only those things that you have read access to are presented to you. And that is ongoing, and we are currently reviewing the pull request, and this looks very close to completion. So that will be useful for those environments where you basically just want to work on your own work and then mark something as global read to let other people see it. We have added features for additional OpenID configuration that has been reviewed and approved into the next release. We have implemented person counts for source concepts. The current implementation as of 2.13 was we actually did record counts for source codes, but we didn't do person counts for source codes. So that was just a matter of introducing those analyses to Achilles and getting those counts aggregated up into our record count table. Edwin Cruz is working on updating Java dependencies to prepare for JDK 17 and also doing a much needed update to a lot of our older dependencies that are in Web API. So he has been diligently working on that. We are also changing some of the dependencies that CIRCE has that makes it a very heavy library. Part of the CIRCE dependencies involves running JavaScript code for one tiny little function, and in that dependency, it incorporates a embedded JavaScript runtime. As you can imagine, that bloats it out a bit. So we are going to a pure Java implementation of some of those functions or all of those functions so that we can remove that dependency. That will reduce the the library about 30 megabytes, and CRAN has a limit of 5 megabytes. So this will help us get into that 5 megabyte range. The last item is we are planning on extending reusable functionality, and we've had many discussions on that. Where it rests right now, I believe, is that any major changes will be actually in the 2.15 release. We'd like to encourage people to use the reusable functionality that was introduced in 2.12, 2.13, and also will be there for 2.14 to get more feedback as to how people would like to use it, where the limitations are, and how we can extend it. So we'd like to actually incorporate more community feedback before really tearing it apart and rebuilding it. And so that is what is going on with the reusable functionality. So that concludes what's coming up for 214. Again, this is something that we'd like to complete for July timeframe, depending on prioritization. And back to you, Sena.
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so you can kind of see from this list, this is being driven by members of the Atlas working group that are doing development. So what we want to try and do within the breakout sessions is to get your input on Atlas from a different perspective. So we want you to think through maybe if you have Atlas installed and available in your environment, and if you don't, are there any barriers for why you don't have Atlas installed, or things that if we changed Atlas, you'd be able to make use of the tool within your organization? If you have Atlas installed, are there barriers or gaps in using Atlas that are preventing you from maybe doing the types of analyses you need to do? And with those ideas, we want to think about what are the resources that can be applied to make improvements to the platform. So this is a good opportunity to try and maybe coalesce members of the community that have a shared interest in a particular feature or functionality and see what we can do to bring those resources to bear.